Welcome, everyone, to our NCAA Social Series. This is episode number 53. I'm Andy Katz. I'm pleased to be joined by Amy Wilson, the Managing Director of the NCAA Office of Inclusion, and LaGwyn Durden. She's the Director of the NCAA Sports Science Institute. Amy and LaGwyn, we're going to talk about a policy here within the NCAA that I think is incredibly important. The issue of transgender student athletes. This is an incredibly personal decision that human beings go through throughout the course of life, through their adolescence, into young adulthood, and beyond. Amy, let me start with you. Why was there a need for a policy?
Hi, Andy, and thanks. It's good to be with you today. And, you know, the NCAA recognizes that we exist to provide, educational sport. And we believe it enhances the educational experience of all our student athletes. And so give a lot of credit to persons who were in this space, working in this space over a decade ago before I was ever here, who realized that there was no pathway to opportunity for transgender student athletes to play a sport in the NCAA system, or no clear guidance on how they could play a sport and be on a team that matched their gender identity. And so we'll talk later about all the work that went into and the membership coming together on this. But, we believe this enhances the lives of young people and helps them in all sorts of ways. We wanted, to provide that opportunity. So it's important for all.
So Amy, let's deal with the policy as itself. How was it formed, and who specifically or which organizations were involved?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to provide some of that history. So in, around 2008, 2009, the Women's Sports Foundation and the National Center for Lesbian Rights sponsored a think tank and on transgender student athlete participation. And there were several NCAA representatives who attended that. We did not have the Sports Science Institute yet. That was founded, I believe, in 2014. But we did have a health and safety area. So NCAA staff from health and safety, from inclusion and other areas of the NCAA attended that think tank. And coming out of that, leaders from there and our staff then started to work together to think about what would a policy look like that worked in the NCAA. And I just want to emphasize, everything that we do is membership directed. So when that policy started to get on paper, it went to Division 1, 2, and 3 key committees there. It went to our student athlete advisory committees, to SAC. It went to the Committee on Competitive Safeguards and Medical Aspects of Health, which is so important, and that our health and safety people lead. Committee on Women's Athletics and other committees in our inclusion space. And so working together, they developed that policy, which was ultimately approved in 2010 by our executive committee, which at the time was the name for our presidents and chancellors that lead the NCAA. It's now called the Board of Governors. But again, it's an association-wide policy, so it was our presidents that approved it. And what it was trying to achieve was a balance between fairness and inclusion, between competitive equity and providing that pathway to opportunity.
So LaGwyn, what is the policy's main objective?
Yeah, great question. So NCAA core values include student athlete well-being, and also creating a fair and inclusive environment. So the goal of this policy is to provide a pathway to athletic participation for our transgender student athletes while being based on the core values that I just mentioned. This policy is consistent with other policies that mandate a year of testosterone suppression therapy. It's also important to note that our current policy allows for the student athlete's physician to oversee the process.
Picking up on that, and I wanted to lay this out at the beginning as well, there's a mental health aspect to this as well. So maybe LaGwyn and Amy, you could add to that the stress, the human stress that goes into this, regardless of where you are within your own search for your identity.
Yeah, I can actually share a story that highlights that mental health stress for all of our student athletes, whether you're transgender, cisgender, non-binary. One of our committee members shared an experience that they witnessed at a championship event. It was a track meet, and a transgender student athlete actually won the track meet or won that event. However, the other competitors in that event all went to the individual that finished second, almost in a manner of consolation, whereas the transgender student athlete that won the event was left alone, isolated. So you can see, like you're mentioning, that humanizing and that mental health issue, it's impactful for anyone in that environment, whether you're the individual that's isolated or the individual that's made to feel that what they accomplished wasn't a successful event.
Amy, if you could dovetail off of that.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. My office communicates regularly with transgender and non-binary student athletes who reach out and want to know more about the policy or the process. And there are mental health challenges. It's also knowing that they are on a journey to affirm who they are. So while there are challenges there, it's also a sense of relief or a sense of empowerment to see people becoming who they really are. I mean, we want our student athletes to reach their potentials. And if you're going to do that, you have to be your true self, and you have to be able to express your core identities and their intersections. And I also note that we have a number of coaches or administrators who reach out, and it's a mental health struggle for them too, to make sure, are we doing everything we can to support our student athletes? And so I don't want to minimize that either, that those who teach and lead student athletes are also an important part of this dialogue, because they are critical in creating a kind of environment where all of our student athletes can prosper.
LaGwyn, just that anecdotal story stresses even more the need for that village, for that sense of community, that every stakeholder has to be involved. So, to that point, what are some of the most frequent questions that you get from the membership on this issue that could involve, how do we help? How do we navigate this?
Yeah, another great question, Andy. So a lot of the questions that I field have to do with the process for the medical exception protocols that student athletes that may be transitioning have to follow. So it's more about submitting the information, what medical documentation is necessary. That leads to some discussion about the actual care for the student athlete with regard to the physician that may be managing their care on campus. It also has to do with making sure that they follow the appropriate protocols involved with use of what might be considered a banned substance or might be a banned substance based on our drug testing program, and making sure that they are following all of those guidelines and parameters. So it's more about the process required for a transgender student athlete to be cleared to participate based on medical exceptions. Amy's office in inclusion may field some questions that are a little bit more different than that perspective.
You want to add on that?
Yeah, sure. And, LaGwyn and all the Sports Science Institute are great partners with us, and we certainly work together. A lot of times it's both of us working together to support. As you can imagine, Andy, with 1,100 schools, with all different missions, we get varied questions. Some will reach out and say, we've never in our athletics department had a conversation about transgender or non-binary student athlete participation. We've never talked about it. We're not sure what we would do if a student athlete came and told us that they identified that way and wanted to participate. So we try to meet those in the athletics department where they are. Where can we help them where they are now? We get questions such as administrators or coaches asking about, I have a student athlete that's telling me that they are transitioning. What does that mean? And what's really important to that is that the transition experience for every person is unique to them and to their own personal development. So some may choose only a social transition that could involve changing a name or a pronoun, or even the way they express their gender. Others, as LaGwyn just mentioned, may move towards hormone therapy of some type. Others may eventually decide on surgery or other place. So it's respecting that individual journey. And so we try to educate coaches and administrators about what that is and how they can best be part of that. And, also I think one of our messages is that as teachers and leaders of young people, we want to be ready when they need us. So one of the best things that we can do is not wait and be reactive to having this conversation, but to do what we can to educate ourselves so that we are ready to support young people on this journey. And that would include cisgender students who have questions about what this means, or also are asking for education. It is a learning process, and people have to be willing, I think, to put ignorance and fear aside and come to the table to see the human side of this and to learn about people's journeys. And again, it's a core identity for folks. And sometimes we're not recognizing that in the way that we do other core identities for people.
LaGwyn, I want to turn to you now. What makes this space so challenging from a policy and governing perspective?
Yeah, this is definitely a complex issue. One reason why it's so challenging is because the science/medical community really hasn't reached a consensus on testosterone threshold. We don't have a definitive answer about that. If there is a threshold, what should that threshold be? So that's one piece that really makes this problematic when we're trying to develop policy. The lack of research is another issue. And not to say that there's no research there, but when we are taking the deeper dive and considering what's important for our population of athletes, we aren't finding the research that's specific to collegiate athletes. If you drill down a bit more and talk about sport-specific impact, when you consider strength and power and possible cardiovascular benefits, when you think about a sport and look at a sprinter versus a distance runner, and having some of the specifics, definitive research and studies to direct or inform us when we are trying to determine what's the best policy for our student athlete. Those are really significant challenges that we're faced with right now.
And what are the challenges from a health and safety standpoint?
So from health and safety, it's really about the care that student athletes are receiving. What we have heard and have learned is that there are some student athletes that may be transitioning that don't have access to individuals that really understand this process for them, are able to provide adequate medical care and coverage consistently. So one piece is access to individuals in the sports medicine or medical community that can really direct and guide the student athlete as they go through this process.
I gotta just go back to LaGwyn's story here for a moment, Amy. I'm just curious also, from a transphobic aspect, how can the policies, the headquarters, the community help educate people to avoid some of that transphobia that she alluded to in that track example?
Yeah, so everyone learns differently. Sometimes a social series like this they can listen to is helpful. We certainly have resources on our inclusion website. There are great websites out there, Chris Mosier's Trans Athlete, all kinds of places where you can get good information. I would say that, back to the problems with this policy and governance and the transphobia, it's not an all or nothing. We have to shut down all opportunity for participation. And that's sort of where, we see some direction. And I think there's some myths that are developing. We talked about them briefly earlier, before we started this, that this myth that, we're going to see male athletes, say, oh, I'm a transgender female and I'm going to go win a medal. And we haven't seen, in the 10 years we've had this policy, we've not seen one example in the NCAA of anyone using that as a way to access women's sports, someone who's born male to do that. We've also not seen, in the 10 years we've had the policy, the end of sports for girls or women at the college level. So I think it's easy to jump to these major conclusions. And when we do that, we're forgetting about the impact on the individuals, right? The overall, their story, their journey, their human experience, and how we want to prioritize our care and concern for people. So we certainly, are working towards both competitive equity and inclusion. We know that's important. As LaGwyn said earlier, those are core values, but there are some myths that are perpetuating, and it's easy to jump to that and hold on to it without being willing to open your mind. And I'll say this, one of the life-changing experiences are to hear stories directly from transgender, non-binary student athletes, but I'll also say it goes back to, we shouldn't always rely on the minoritized community to educate us. We also have a responsibility as leaders to educate ourselves and to listen carefully to the stories of others as part of that education.
All right, so a couple of quick things here. And I guess I'll start with you, LaGwyn. You tell me, the two of you can tackle this. So who was involved in the Gender Identity Summit? And maybe, Amy, on the back end, you can say just, what were some of the key takeaways?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Gender Identity Summit was a great event. We had a broad representation from the membership. There were university presidents, athletic directors, team physicians and athletic trainers, mental health professionals, and external subject matter experts. And importantly, there was also representation from the student athlete body, including both cisgender and transgender student athletes. We actually conducted a student athlete panel where attendees were able to hear their experience as a transgender student athlete and things that they may have faced during their collegiate career or continue to face. So a great variety of perspective, great open dialogue from different individuals' experiences, expertise, and understanding, as well as subject matter.
Yeah, I'll just follow to say, I think some of the immediate takeaways from the 2 days we spent together in early October as part of the summit, and I'll also note, just to back up a second, that the membership asked for this summit. Our inclusion committees that have our membership on it and our Committee on Competitive Safeguards and Medical Aspects of Sport all came together to say, the evidence isn't here to say we need to change this policy or to give us direction. We need to hold this summit and we need to be at the table and continue this important dialogue. And what we learned were a couple of things. It is absolutely essential to prioritize the voice of student athletes in all of this. The NCAA exists because of student athletes. All of us work in athletics, college athletics, because of student athletes. If that was a priority, that we needed to continue to listen to those voices and those stories. We also realized that education was essential, that even folks who read our materials and came to that summit still had fundamental questions about transgender, non-binary student athlete participation, and that we needed to really think through how we could support that education. And then lastly, it's the point LaGwyn has already articulated so well, that we need to wrap our arms around the research that exists, and also to identify the places where it's not there. And as a higher ed organization, we need to be at the table to try to encourage that research and to find the best ways forward for our student athletes. I think those were the key takeaways in the immediate aftermath of the summit. And LaGwyn and I are proud and dedicated to continuing to lead the important actions coming out of the summit. And LaGwyn, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the writing group that we're organizing and the narrative review that is coming.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. So as Amy mentioned, one of the takeaways from the summit is a narrative literature review. And we are fortunate enough to have established a core writing group who will assist with that and take a deep dive into the research that exists and examine that and determine what is applicable to our scenarios with our student athletes and hopefully provide some real grounded foundational information, grounded in the science and the literature, information that will help inform us when we move to make policy recommendations.
So to that point, LaGwyn and Amy, what I think is great here is that this is being proactive. You can't necessarily wait to see what happens in various states or at the federal level. That this needs to be proactive from the NCAA, from the membership, so that any individual across the country at any level in sports, Division 1, 2, 3, feels like someone is looking out for them, that there could just maybe be one person going through this, at least to know there's a policy to protect that one person, because all these people obviously deserve that right as a student athlete within the NCAA membership. So how do you tackle that outreach, Amy? I'll start with you, about letting everyone know that, we're on this, we're evolving, we're changing, but you've got advocates here. If you are going through this, if you've already made a personal decision, regardless of what stage you are in that search for your own identity, or if you've made that choice on your own.
Yeah. So, LaGwyn and I have been talking to a lot of audiences. Just last week, we talked to Division 1, 2, and 3 SAC, our Student Athlete Advisory Councils, to let them know what we're doing and to bring them into the conversation. Our annual inclusion forum will be held the first week of June. There will be an educational session on transgender and non-binary student athlete participation. And last week, we recorded a short video that was sent out to all of the membership, kind of talking through what is the policy, we're here to support you. So we're thinking through this in complex ways. And all of those participants at the summit, we're inviting them to come along with us to form groups to work on harnessing educational materials that already exist and creating new ones. So we're at the table and we're committed to supporting the membership. And we hope that as we support athletics, that ripples across campus as well, right? That the presence of sport on campus and the work we're doing will affect higher education more broadly.
LaGwyn, I'll give you the final word.
Oh man, no pressure. So I think that Amy said it well. We are trying to make the membership aware. This social series is one of the ways that we're doing that, and all of the other things that Amy listed. I think it's really important that the membership understands that we are here coming into through the avenue of transgender student athletes. It can be through the mental health, it can be through the athletics healthcare administrator, it can be through any of the avenues that are the tentacles of the association. So I think just understanding that we're here for support, and we welcome any questions, any concerns, any constructive criticisms, and anything that we can do to provide guidance and resources for the membership. That's our goal.
Well, Amy and LaGwyn, I appreciate it, and I hope everyone watching realizes the hard work that's going in, and that if anyone is going through this, or any coach, administrator, there are advocates out there, policies being evolved on, and that everyone has a right, obviously, to be protected. So obviously this is a positive step forward in an evolving topic that is long overdue being addressed. As always, we appreciate your time here, watching us here on our NCAA Social Series. We're with you every week. This is episode 53, and you can always check out ncaa.org/social series. And last week we posted the year edition, basically, where you can get all 52 episodes there. Well, now we're on to year 2 here, episode 53. You can find them all archived and go back to when Amy was on the program earlier in the year. So we've got repeat guests here, and LaGwyn, I'm sure we will have you back at some point as well. So we'll talk again next week. Stay safe, everyone.